Hello and welcome to our July newsletter video. My name's Barry Beckham and the subject this month is PicturesToExe, the creation of slideshows. There's a number of different tips and techniques that we learn through our photography and audio-visual. And I think after a while we tend to take them for granted and assume that everyone else knows about these techniques. But someone asked me a question recently which showed that's not the case. Someone who's been making slideshows for quite some time asked how I managed to produce a slideshow with a very thin line around the outer edge of the images, which he was able to see very well because he was viewing a 1920 1080 slideshow 16:9 format, but he was viewing it on a monitor running 2560 by 1440 pixels. Now that is still 16:9, but it leaves a gap around the edge. That gap is going to be black, and he was able to see the thin line I placed around the outer edge of my images, and that, to be honest, was the whole purpose of me doing that. So the trick to doing this is to be able to create the frame that we're looking for, to be able to apply it quickly and easily to a slideshow that may contain 50 images, to have that frame easily changeable and adjustable after we've applied it, but also to ensure that the frame doesn't interfere with any of the animation of the images. We cannot animate a frame with the image, of course, because we're going to see it. Now perhaps I can use PicturesToExe and the objects and animation screen to give a visual demonstration of what I'm really talking about here. If I open up this image into objects and animation, I'm going to just reduce the size of it, so I'm simulating here the fact that someone is watching my slideshow on a monitor running a higher resolution than I created my slideshow. It could be as well that they're running the slideshow on an iPad where the format is slightly different, but you can see that the dark areas of the edge of this image bleed off into the background, and there you can see the edge of the image, and it spoils it a little bit. What we could do with here is a bit of an edge effect. Well, we can apply that here with the properties, adjust image and border, click to enable it. I'm choosing 2 pixels in white. Let me get rid of that. Let me click into the grey area. This is the sort of line we want to create. But of course, if I animated this particular image and I ran that animation, of course the line changes as well, and that wouldn't be correct. So here we are back in the main window of PicturesToExe, and what I've got here is a simulation of a very short slideshow. As you can see, I've got something like 8 images in my slideshow, but we could quite easily have 80 images. For demo purposes, 8 is going to be enough. So the first thing I need to do is to create my frame, my thin line around the outer edge, and to do that we need something like Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. So I'm going to open up Photoshop and make a start. The aspect ratio I'm going to make my little demo slideshow is 16:9, 1920 by 1080, which is pretty standard these days. So I need to make my frame or my line to match that size. We can do that by going to File, New, and making sure we've got pixels selected from the measure options here. I can put the values that I want, 1920, 1080. Now in normal circumstances the background contents need to be transparent, but to enable us to see what we're doing, it's not a bad idea to use either our background or our foreground color. In fact, my background color is white and I get a choice of white. Let's choose Other, and I'll choose black. I'm only doing this so we can see clearly what we're about to do with the line. Over the top of that black background, I'm going to go to my layers here and click to create a new blank layer. It's that blank layer I'm going to produce my line, but you can see if I just use a transparent background, very difficult to see any thin white lines around the edge. But we will need the transparent nature of this layer, so this one in black is just there to make things easier to see. Once I've done that, I'm going to select all. Now you can do that from the menus at the top of the screen, and as you can see it selects the outer edge, or there's a universal keystroke of Control A. Now we need to add a few pixels to the inside edge of this line. No point in putting them on the outside because we wouldn't see them. So I'm going to go to my edit menu, choose stroke, and I'm going to choose 2 or 3 pixels here. I'm going to suggest that your values here are probably going to be in the 1s and 2 pixels for this sort of resolution. But just to make it a little bit easier for us to see and for demo purposes, you'll forgive me for making my line a little bit heavy. So I'm going to go with 3 pixels, changing the color to pure white. I'm going to click OK to that. In fact, I've got it already set on the inside. Click OK. I can hit Control D to remove that selection. There you can see how that black background enables us to see just what that thin line is going to look like. But of course what we need to do now is to turn that black background off in layers, because that is the image that we need to save. If you look really carefully you can just about see the white line around the outer edge. So I'm going to save that into the same folder I'm working from, so File, Save As. There's the folder. It's defaulted to a Photoshop file, that's why you can't see any of the other images. If I selected JPEG, you'd see all the images I've got prepared ready for this demo, but it's not that option I want. I want to make sure that the center part of my canvas here remains transparent. So I need to save it as a PNG file. I'm going to use the word frame, I think. I generally standardize on that. There's the save as type PNG. I'm going to save that. Now we can go back into PicturesToExe. So here I am back with my demonstration slideshow. You'll notice there's 3 different frames here. I created one which was a distressed edge. There's a more typical matte frame, but there's the one we just created. We can just about see the line there. So I always choose to place my frames around the images, and I choose most of the time not to do so on the blanks or the titles, but that's a personal choice. But here I'm going to go to the first slide in my sequence. Remember, this has 8 images but could have many more than that. Open the Objects and Animation screen. This is where we need to be a little bit careful, because whenever we open up the Objects and Animation we get that bounding box around the outer edge. If I went up here and I added the frame I've just created, the frame is added as a child of the parent. Now that would give us a problem, because if I decided a little bit later on to give this image a gentle zoom in or out, the frame is going to move with the parent. So I'm just going to highlight the frame and delete it. When we come into PicturesToExe Objects and Animation screen, just click into the grey area and you'll see the bounding box disappears. Then we can add the frame, and you'll notice now it looks different. It's not connected to the image itself. They're independent. I could animate the image and the frame would stay exactly where it is. Now, to get the frame onto all of the images in the slideshow, what I do is to select the frame over in the Objects section on the right hand side, and I use the shortcut keys of Control C to copy that frame. If I then jump to the next picture and click into the grey area, I can hit Control V to paste it in place, and when I go to the next image I can do the same, and so on. So once you get into a flow here, you can actually get all of the images in your slideshow framed up pretty quickly. And there we are, done already. Let me close that, and there you can see them all still in place, but now we can just about see that thin white line around the edge of each of the images. Let me pick just one of these images and open it up into the Objects and Animation screen. Making sure I've got the image selected and not the frame, I'm going to animate this. So I'm going to click up here to produce an end key point and a starting key point. And I'm just going to allow this to zoom out just a little bit. So at the start, I want the image slightly bigger. And at the end, I want it to drop down to that size. Now I can press play. And you can see how the animation continues, but of course the frame sitting independently over the top remains stationary. So it gives us that freedom. Now of course what can happen here sometimes is if we then view our slideshow, maybe 100% fill in the screen, we then realize the frame that we've made is too bright, too thick, too thin. Well, we can make quick and easy adjustments now. If I take you back into Photoshop, there's the original artwork still sitting on the screen. If we go back into our layers, I'll just turn on our black background for a moment, and there you can see I deliberately made this a little bit on the thick side, and of course pure white generally is a little bit overpowering for a thin edge line. So I'm going to create a new blank layer above that one, turn that one off, and I'm going to make a new one. Control A will select the image, edit, stroke. Now I'm going to temper this. I'm going to say no, I only want this to be 1 pixel in width, and I don't want white. I'm going to click the white and choose a mid-grey. So I'm tempering the brightness of the frame I've made. So we can click OK and OK, remaining with this on the inside. Control D will remove the selection. You can see the difference already, particularly if I turn this one on and off. Turn off the blank. Now all we have to do now is to save this over the top of our previous frame, and it will automatically be applied to every single image in our slideshow. So let's quickly do that. File, Save As. Selecting the PNG format to retain that transparent center. I'm going to go over the top of frame, save. Yes, I do want to overwrite it. Now when we go into PicturesToExe and we can look at one of the images, let's choose something different and open the Objects and Animation. Now it's actually a little bit difficult to see the line. But once that image was projected in a slideshow, even though that line is very thin and mid-grey, it will be there and doing its job. And perhaps I can demonstrate that by, let's make the image size a little bigger. That's not helping. Let's go to 75%. If I pick up my frame and I just move it a little bit, there you can see what we've actually achieved. It's much more delicate. It's still going to be doing everything we want it to do, but it's not going to overpower our image. Within the few images that I had open in PicturesToExe, you saw this one, although that was a little bit more difficult to see without the black background. A distressed edge effect. I've just put mine against a black background so you can see it for the same reasons as I described with the thin line. So let's assume we want to add this to our slideshow. And of course we can change the color of this and add it as many times as we wish. But because we've got the thin line around the outer edge, I can add this pretty quickly and easily. If I go to File, Save As, choose the PNG format, and then overwrite frame. Of course, if we wanted to save the frame that was there, we could always go in and just put a little prefix after this, frame 1, frame 2. That way, if we change our mind and want to go back, we don't have to recreate a frame we created earlier. But here, I'll just overwrite. And now let's take a look in PicturesToExe. And coming back into PicturesToExe, there's our distressed edge automatically applied to every single image This one's gone awry a little bit. Remember I moved it just to show you that thin line? Well, I'd need to replace it back into position. Let me do that. Let me pick up my frame. Just going to click the pan here and it'll drop back into position. And there's the last couple, all with the frame attached. So it's going to be quite quick and easy for me to go back into Photoshop or Photoshop Elements to maybe temper the color of this, adjust the frame, just copy it, overwrite the original, and every single slide in the sequence will then contain the new frame. And of course I could do much the same if I wanted to use a more traditional frame created in Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. This frame I'm using one I made some years ago, so it may be a little bit large for the demo pictures I have, but it's the technique on how we apply it which I'm demonstrating here. So all I would need to do here once again is to save this as a PNG file, overwrite my original frame, go back into PicturesToExe, and it's all done. And of course I've left myself the same flexibility I have with any frame, one like this or a very thin line, by going to the Objects and Animation screen. I've got a start and an end point for my animation, so if I want to just make this zoom out just a little bit, I can do that independently to the frame that's sitting around the image. And if I want to change the frame, of course all I need to do is overwrite the existing frame, and if I had this attached to 80 images it will be done instantly. Now there is one thing I'd like to point out just before I close. In the spinning round of the window just then, I went back to Photoshop, I recreated my very thin edged frame, 1 pixel in that mid-tone grey, and I've applied it to all of these images. But when you apply changes outside of a software like PicturesToExe that's already running, sometimes it's not reflected. In other words, it's not refreshed automatically, and I'm still showing the frame or the drop shadow matte border that I had a few seconds ago. So one way to get around this, of course, and we should be doing this anyway, is to be saving our project file regularly. But if I just close down PicturesToExe, and it only takes a second to do that, and then relaunch it, you can see now it reflects that thin line I've just placed on there. And once again, difficult to see, so I'll just move it a little bit, and there it is. Now there are other ways to create thin lines around the outer edge of our images in a slideshow, but I like this method for its speed of use, the controllability, how I can adjust the color and thickness of the frame, and I nearly always need to do that depending on the images and the density of those images, and of course we can change the frame completely and do it all in one go.